She looked me straight in the eye, that cold, familiar look, and said 5 words that just shattered everything. I never asked you to save me. It echoed in my head, a cruel punch to the gut, after I'd burned through every single dollar I had, just to keep her breathing. 23 years of marriage, 2 kids, a mortgage I'd paid off early because I wanted us to feel secure. And that's what I got. Sarah walked out with another man 6 weeks after I drained my retirement account for her medical bills. My own daughter, Chloe, stood there, telling me I was selfish for being hurt. My son, Noah, he was the only one who didn't lose his mind, and honestly, that's the only reason I'm still standing today. I filed for divorce the same night they left, and I meant every single word when I told them to get out of my house. People still ask me if I regret it, if I went too far, if I should have been the bigger person. I sleep better now than I have in years, so you tell me. The thing about a long marriage is, you stop seeing the signs. You think you know someone. Sarah and I, we met in college, got married young. Chloe came along pretty quickly, then Noah 2 years later. She worked as a nurse for maybe 5 years before she decided staying home made more sense, and I never questioned it. I was making good money in sales, and the kids definitely needed someone around. I handled everything, the mortgage, the car payments, the college funds. She handled the house and the kids' schedules. It worked. Or at least, I thought it did. Looking back now, I can see how I slowly became the ATM, and she became the beneficiary. But you don't see that stuff when you're in it. You just keep working and providing because that's what you signed up for. Have you ever felt like you were doing everything right only to realize you were being played the whole time? The car crash happened on a perfectly normal morning in early spring. Sarah said she was heading to her yoga class, something she'd been doing twice a week for about 6 months. I was already at the office when the hospital called. An officer said there'd been an accident, that Sarah's car had gone off the road and hit a concrete barrier. I needed to come immediately. I honestly don't even remember the drive there. Chloe drove in from her university in Chicago, 3 hours away, and Noah left his high school early. We sat in that waiting room for hours. When the surgeon finally came out, he said she'd make it, but the injuries were severe. Multiple surgeries, weeks in intensive care, months of rehab ahead of us. The bills started coming even before she left the ICU. Our insurance had a high deductible, $8,000 up front, and after that, they covered 80%. Sounds reasonable, until you're looking at surgical fees, specialist consultations, ICU charges running thousands a day, and rehab that wasn't fully covered. I pulled money from our savings first, then from the emergency fund I'd been building for 15 years. When that ran dry, I took an early withdrawal from my retirement account and ate the penalties because, really, what else was I supposed to do? I maxed out 2 credit cards, paying for things insurance wouldn't touch. I even picked up extra freelance work on weekends, just to keep us afloat. Sarah was in bad shape for weeks. Couldn't walk without help, couldn't shower alone, needed medications around the clock. I did all of it because she's my wife, and you don't abandon someone when they're down. I helped her to the bathroom at 2 in the morning. I drove her to physical therapy 4 times a week. I rearranged my entire work schedule so I could be there. Noah helped when he could, but he was 16 and still had school. Chloe came home twice during those months and mostly just stayed in her room. Sarah started getting better around the 2-month mark, and that's when things got weird. She started spending hours on her phone, joining some support group for accident survivors, going out for coffee with people I'd never even heard of. I figured it was part of her healing process, that she needed to talk to people who understood what she'd been through. But she started pulling away from me. Conversations got shorter. She stopped asking about my day. She'd flinch when I touched her shoulder. I thought maybe it was trauma. Maybe she was processing something heavy, so I gave her space. Then one night, she sat me down in the living room with both kids there and said she wanted a divorce. Just like that. No build-up, no counseling, nothing. She said she'd been unhappy for years, that the accident made her realize life was too short to stay in a marriage that didn't fulfill her. She wanted freedom and new experiences, a chance to actually live. I sat there, completely silent, because my brain simply couldn't process what I was hearing. Noah looked horrified, but Chloe, my own daughter, turned to me and said, "Dad, don't make this about you. Mom deserves to be happy." I asked Sarah if there was someone else, and she got defensive. Said it wasn't about another person, it was about her finding herself. The whole thing felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced this speech. I didn't sleep that night. I kept running the numbers in my head, everything I'd spent, everything I'd sacrificed, and this was the thanks I got? The next morning, I told Sarah and Chloe they had 1 hour to pack their things and leave. Sarah acted shocked, said I was being cruel, said she never expected this kind of reaction. I told her I'd given her everything, including my financial future, and if she wanted freedom, she could have it, but not under my roof. Chloe started crying, called me selfish, said I was punishing Mom for being honest. I looked at her and said, "You're 19 years old. You picked a side. Live with it." They both left that afternoon. Noah stayed with me, told me he didn't understand what was happening, but he knew Mom was wrong. That kid saw what I couldn't see yet. The house felt empty, but also lighter. I couldn't explain it, but for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was drowning. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about how cold Sarah had been. How calculated the whole divorce conversation felt. If she was really just finding herself, why the rush? Why the defense when I asked about someone else? So, I did something I'm not proud of, but also don't regret. We'd always shared the desktop computer in the home office. Same passwords, same accounts, nothing hidden because we trusted each other. I logged into her email. It took me about 10 minutes to find what I was looking for. Messages to someone named Leo going back 7 months. 7 months, that meant it started 2 months before the accident. I read through them, and my hands started shaking. This wasn't some emotional affair that got out of hand. This was a plan. I'll spare you the details, but the tone was clear as day. I was the backup, the wallet, the safety net, while she figured out her exit strategy. One message from right after the accident said something about making the most of the recovery time. Another one, from a month ago, talked about how I'd taken out loans and how that was pathetic. She called me pathetic to this guy while I was literally helping her recover. I sat there staring at the screen until the sun came up. I wasn't angry. I was clear. I finally understood exactly who I'd been married to. And I knew exactly what I was going to do next. I spent the next 3 days going through everything. Every email, every text backup, every shared document on that computer. What I found wasn't just an affair, it was a blueprint. Leo wasn't some random guy she met at her support group. He'd been in her yoga class since last fall, and the messages made it clear they'd gotten close long before the crash happened. The earliest message I found was from 7 months back, just casual flirting. But by month 5, they were talking about futures and fresh starts and how Sarah deserved better than her boring, stable life. There was one message from Leo sent 3 days after her accident that said, "Take your time healing. I'm not going anywhere." And her response? "I know this changes nothing with us." That hit me harder than anything, because I was sleeping in a chair next to her hospital bed that very same week. But the worst part wasn't the romance. It was the cold calculation and how they talked about me. She told him I'd pulled money from retirement, and he replied, asking if that meant I was desperate. And she said, "It works for now." Another message from a month ago had her complaining about physical therapy, and Leo asked if I was still playing nurse, and Sarah wrote that I thought I was a hero and it was honestly pathetic how much I needed to be needed. I had to walk away from the computer because I felt sick. Not heartbroken sick, just disgusted sick. Then I found the money. Sarah had a separate checking account I'd forgotten about. Something she'd opened years ago for a side gig that never materialized. I only knew the login because we used the same password for everything. I logged in, expecting maybe a few hundred, and the balance showed $32,000. $32,000, I sat there, staring at that number, trying to figure out where it came from. And then I checked the transaction history. Deposits going back 3 years. Small amounts at first, then bigger chunks. Some of it was inheritance from her parents, who'd passed a few years back. Some was birthday money. Some I couldn't track. But the point is, she had $32,000 sitting there while I was draining my retirement and maxing out credit cards to pay her medical bills. She didn't offer a single cent. Not one. I checked the dates of my biggest withdrawals against her account activity, and there was nothing. She just watched me drown financially and said nothing. I called my lawyer the next morning. His name's Mr. Jensen. He's been practicing family law for 30 years. Doesn't waste time on feelings. I laid out everything, the affair, the messages, the secret money, the timeline. He listened, took notes, and then asked if we had a prenup. I said yes. We'd signed one early in our marriage when Sarah's parents were setting up their estate and wanted to make sure their money stayed in the family. Mr. Jensen asked if I had a copy, and I found it in our file cabinet that same day. He read through it and stopped on page 4. There was a clause about infidelity, standard stuff, apparently, saying that if either party committed adultery, the prenup would be void and assets would be divided according to state law. Sarah had insisted on that clause back then, said it was about protecting the marriage, and had signed it without thinking twice because I never planned on cheating. Mr. Jensen looked up and told me this changed everything. If I could prove the affair, she wouldn't get the protection she thought she had. I told him to file for divorce immediately and to update my will while he was at it. I wanted Noah as my sole beneficiary. Chloe got nothing. Mr. Jensen warned me that cutting out a child could be challenged, but I told him I didn't care. Make it clear that her choices had consequences. Sarah got served 4 days later. I wasn't there, but Noah told me she called him, screaming, asking what his father was doing, saying I'd lost my mind. She tried calling me 17 times that day, and I ignored every single one. Then she started texting, first angry, then desperate, then back to angry. She called me vindictive. Said I was punishing her for being honest about her feelings. Said I'd regret this. I didn't respond to any of it. Chloe sent me a long message saying I was destroying the family, that Mom made a mistake, but everyone deserves forgiveness, that I was being cruel for no reason. I blocked her number. Noah asked me if I was okay, and I told him I'd never been clearer about anything in my life. Mr. Jensen moved fast, filing motions, requesting financial disclosures, citing the prenup clause. Sarah hired her own lawyer, and they pushed back hard, claiming the affair started after we'd emotionally separated, that the prenup shouldn't apply. It was exactly the kind of legal dance I expected. Then things got worse. I was at work one afternoon when 2 police officers showed up asking for me. My boss looked panicked. I walked outside with them, and they said they needed to ask me some questions about a domestic violence report. I actually laughed because I thought they had the wrong person, but then they said Sarah's name. She'd filed a report claiming I'd physically harmed her during her recovery, that I'd been rough with her during care at home, that I grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise, that she'd been afraid to say anything because she was dependent on me. I stood there, completely frozen, because this was insane. The officers asked if I'd ever laid hands on her, and I said, never. Not once, not even close. They asked if anyone could confirm that, and I said yes. My son, Noah, was home most of the time. Plus, I had my work schedule showing I was barely home except to help with appointments. One of the officers seemed skeptical of the whole thing. He asked when these incidents supposedly happened, and the dates Sarah gave didn't match up with my schedule at all. I offered to show them everything, my calendar, my work logs, the physical therapy appointment record showing her actual therapist was the one doing the sessions. They took notes and said they'd follow up. I called Mr. Jensen the second they left, and he said this was a tactic, a bad one, but still a tactic to make me look dangerous and gain leverage in the divorce. Noah heard about the police visit from a neighbor and came home furious. He said Chloe had to know about this, that there was no way Mom filed a false report without talking to her first. I told him to let it go, that the truth would come out. But Noah's sharper than I give him credit for. He went into Chloe's old room, where she'd left some stuff, found her old laptop she'd forgotten in the rush, and it was still logged into her messages. He came downstairs 20 minutes later with the laptop open and said, "Dad, you need to see this." It was a conversation between Sarah and Chloe from a week earlier. Chloe had asked if this would be enough to get the money, and Sarah replied that it should be, that she wasn't losing everything because of some stupid clause. There were more messages talking about how the police report would shift things in court, how I'd have to settle to avoid a trial, how they just needed to make me look unstable. Noah was shaking when he showed me. He said he couldn't believe his own sister would do this. I took screenshots of everything and sent them straight to Mr. Jensen. The next day, Mr. Jensen forwarded everything to the prosecutor's office. Filing a false police report is a crime, and conspiracy to file one is even worse. The detective who'd come to my house called me back, said they'd reviewed my evidence and the inconsistencies in Sarah's story, and they were closing the domestic violence case with no charges. He also said the false report was being referred for potential charges against Sarah and possibly Chloe. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt tired. Sarah called me that night from a number I didn't recognize. Caller ID showed as blocked, and I only picked up because I thought it might be work. She was crying, saying this had all gotten out of hand, that she never meant for things to go this far. I told her, "You called the police on me with a fake story. You involved our daughter in a crime. This is exactly as far as you meant it to go." And I hung up. 2 weeks later, Mr. Jensen called and said the court date was set, discovery was complete, and he had everything he needed. He told me they tried to bury me and buried themselves instead. That I just needed to stay calm in court and let him handle it. I wasn't worried about staying calm. I was past anger by then. I just wanted it done. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, just a regular room with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that made everything look tired. Sarah sat at the opposite table with her lawyer, wearing a navy dress and minimal makeup, probably trying to look sympathetic. Chloe wasn't there. Mr. Jensen had warned me she'd likely stay away since showing up could make her look more involved in the false report conspiracy. Noah sat behind me in the gallery, and I could feel him watching everything, like he was memorizing it. The judge was a woman named Judge Reynolds, probably in her late 50s, with reading glasses on a chain and an expression that said she'd seen every trick in the book. Mr. Jensen had told me she was fair, but didn't tolerate games, which was exactly what I needed. Sarah's lawyer started by painting me as controlling. Said I'd used the medical crisis to establish financial dominance, that Sarah had felt trapped and afraid. It was a performance, and not a good one. Then Mr. Jensen stood up and methodically destroyed every word. He presented the timeline of the affair, showed it started months before the accident, entered the text messages between Sarah and Leo into evidence. He showed the judge the secret bank account with $32,000, pointed out that Sarah had watched me drain my retirement without contributing a cent. Then he brought up the prenup, explained the infidelity clause, and showed how Sarah had tried to weaponize a false police report to gain leverage. The judge read through the messages herself, and I watched her face change from neutral to something colder. Judge Reynolds asked Sarah's lawyer if he had any explanation for the affair timeline or the hidden money. He stammered something about emotional separation and financial independence, but it sounded weak even to me. Then the judge asked Sarah directly if she'd filed the police report, and Sarah said yes, but that she'd felt genuinely scared at the time, that her memory of the recovery period was confused. Judge Reynolds looked at her for a long moment and said, "Confused memory doesn't explain text messages planning the report with your daughter." Sarah went pale, and her lawyer tried to object, but the judge cut him off. She said this wasn't just a marriage dispute. It was a pattern of calculated deception, and she wouldn't reward that behavior. The ruling came faster than I expected. The divorce was granted. The prenup was voided due to proven adultery, and assets would be split according to state law, which meant dividing everything, including Sarah's hidden account. Noah would remain with me. Sarah would get standard visitation if he wanted it. And because she drained marital goodwill through her actions, she'd have to reimburse me for a portion of the medical expenses I'd covered. It wasn't full repayment, but it was something. Judge Reynolds finished by noting that the criminal case for the false report was separate and still pending. Sarah started crying. Her lawyer put his hand on her shoulder, but I felt nothing watching it. No satisfaction, no anger, just a sense of something finally being over. I left the courthouse with Noah, and we sat in my car for a few minutes, not saying anything. He asked if I felt better, and I told him I felt clear, which was different, but good enough. Mr. Jensen called that evening and said the divorce would be finalized in 30 days, that I should prepare for Sarah to make one more attempt at reconciliation, because people always did. I told him I was prepared for anything. But what happened next I didn't see coming. I couldn't stop thinking about Leo, this guy who'd helped blow up my life, and I wanted to know who he really was. So, I did some digging. Social media, public records, the usual stuff you can find if you know where to look. Turns out Leo had lied to Sarah about being separated. He was still very much married to a woman named Michelle, had been for 12 years, and they had 2 kids. The separation he'd mentioned to Sarah was apparently fictional. I found Michelle's contact information through a mutual connections profile, and I spent 2 days debating whether to reach out. Finally, I wrote her a letter. Kept it factual, explained who I was and what I'd discovered, and included copies of the messages between Leo and Sarah. I told her I wasn't looking for revenge. I just thought she deserved to know the truth, the same way I deserved to know it. I mailed it and tried not to think about it. For weeks later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Michelle. She thanked me for the letter, said she'd had suspicions, but no proof, and that she'd already filed for divorce. She said Leo had tried to deny everything, but the messages were undeniable, and her lawyer was taking him apart financially. She mentioned he'd been using joint credit cards for hotels and gifts, money that should have gone to their kids, and the judge in their case wasn't being kind about it. I told her I was sorry she was going through this, and she said, "Don't be. You gave me the truth." That's more than he ever did. We talked for a few more minutes, and then hung up. 2 months after that, I heard through Noah, who'd heard from a friend, that Leo had lost his job and was living in a cheap apartment because Michelle's divorce had cleaned him out. Sarah had apparently tried to keep the relationship going, but it fell apart fast once the money and future disappeared. Turns out Leo was exactly like Sarah, looking for an upgrade, not a partner. The criminal case against Sarah and Chloe took 4 months, but eventually they both took plea deals. Sarah got probation and community service, plus a fine. Chloe got the same, but hers came with a mark on her record. The university she attended found out about the charges and suspended her for a semester, something about conduct violations and integrity standards. Her scholarship was pulled pending review. She called Noah, crying about it, and he told her she'd made her choices. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Sarah showed up at my door. I saw her through the window and almost didn't answer, but I figured I might as well hear whatever she had to say. She looked tired, older somehow, and she asked if we could talk. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. She said she'd made mistakes, that she'd been confused and scared after the accident, that she wanted to fix things. I asked her if she was serious, and she said yes, that we built a life together, and it didn't have to end like this. I told her, "Sarah, you had $32,000 and watched me go broke. You planned to leave me while I was taking care of you. You filed a false police report. There's nothing to fix." She started crying and said she knew she'd messed up, but people deserve second chances. I said, "You're a grown woman with a nursing degree and a working car. You'll figure it out." And I went back inside. Chloe showed up 3 weeks later. Same thing, standing on my porch, looking miserable. She said she was sorry, that she'd been manipulated by Mom, that she needed help with tuition since her scholarship was gone. I looked at my daughter and felt nothing but distance. I told her she was an adult, that she'd picked a side and helped file a false criminal report against me, and that choices had consequences. She said I couldn't just cut her off, that I was her father, and I said, I'm Noah's father, too, and he's the one who stood by me. The college fund goes to him now. She called me cruel, and I said, no, I'm just done being the person everyone uses. She left, and I haven't heard from her since. Noah asked me once if I'd ever forgive either of them, and I told him forgiveness wasn't the issue. Trust was. And they burned that completely. He nodded like he understood. These days, I'm rebuilding. The money is slowly coming back. Work is steady, and the house is quieter but peaceful. Noah's a senior now, and we're already looking at colleges. He wants to study engineering, and I told him I'd support whatever he chooses. I sleep through the night now. Don't wake up feeling like I'm drowning in problems that aren't mine. People ask if I regret how hard I went after Sarah and Chloe. If I feel bad about Michelle's situation with Leo, if I should have been more forgiving. I tell them I spent 23 years being the person who carried everything. And the moment I put it down, I finally felt like I could breathe. They wanted freedom. They got it. I got mine, too. What do you think about all this?